with that, maybe I can tell you a little bit about how I made wine and how I'm sitting here today in Sonoma, California, as a vineyard, vineyard as a grape grower and as a winemaker. And it wasn't something I fell into easily. I'm a first generation guy, so it wasn't the family business. I didn't grow up in Napa or Sonoma. I actually grew up in Southern California in Ventura County, and went to college in UC Santa Barbara, and I gravitated towards environmental studies classes and natural science classes and geology and things where I could be outdoors and learning about nature. And little did I know at the time how well that was preparing me for my future, growing grapes up in Mendocino County and working with vineyards all over Central and Northern California. But specifically, the way I got into wine, and I'll keep this story somewhat brief, but when I got out of college, I took a job in the casino industry. And one of the fringe benefits of working in that job was going to VIP dinners and these special events where they would put out the best food and the best wine and the best whiskey and all these great things that I was exposed to. And wine really just resonated with me. And I started collecting wine and reading about wine, educating myself. And when I decided to turn my life on its head and leave that kind of high pressure job at the tender age of 29, I moved back to California and started taking winemaking classes at UC Davis. And it just seemed like a way to learn how to make wine. And I wasn't doing it full time at that point. It was just an avocation. It wasn't my vocation. It wasn't my actual job. But I knew that I wanted to make wine, even if it was just in my garage, buying a ton of grapes and making a big mess and making a couple of barrels of wine. And that's how I, very humbly got my start almost 20 years ago now. So I have been at it for a while since then. After a number of years, I decided I wanted to focus on Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir can be so many different wines depending on which vineyards and which appellations, which parts of California it's grown. And then eventually, in 2012, I stumbled upon this, startup here in California, at least on the U.S. side of things, Naked Wines, and they had this amazing concept to connect winemakers with the wine buyers, and I thought it was a great idea, and I met with them, and I was one of the first California winemakers to sign on. So it's been an amazing experience, and that's basically the last 20, 30 years of my life in 2 or 3 minutes. Hope it gives you some background on what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. What I love about the wines I make with Naked Wines is I work with some varieties I didn't originally start out making. I mentioned I was making Pinot Noir and Chardonnay when I started my winery, and now I get to focus on Zinfandel and Syrah and Grenache and some of these other amazing varieties. Southern French, Spanish, south of France type varieties, Mediterranean varieties that really grow well in Sonoma County, and specifically Dry Creek Valley, where it's a little bit warmer than other parts of Sonoma. It doesn't get quite the direct coastal influence and Pacific influence, so the temperatures are up a little bit in the summertime, and we can ripen these these Mediterranean varieties. And also through my work with Naked, I was able to start working with George Unti at Unti Vineyards, and I'm going to hold off on the Unti story for just a little while, because I'm realizing I'm going out of order here a little bit. I should probably talk about, Anderson Valley and the rosé first before I do too big a deep dive into Dry Creek. But suffice it to say, some of you, and I know we were just talking a moment ago, some of you have had my Zinfandels from Dry Creek, the crowd pleasing that I do with my good friend Ken Dice. I've also done an Unti Vineyard Zinfandel. So some of these varieties that I wouldn't have got a chance to work with, I get to work with thanks to you and some of these amazing vineyards as well. So with that, I'm going to pause, take a quick sip of rosé. And Trevor, just a quick check. Is there anything in the chat that needs to be addressed now, or can we wait till the end?
No, just everyone's guilt shaming Christy for buying all the Grenache. So nothing you need to worry about.
I will not be shamed.
Own it, Christy. All right. Well, like I was saying, I want to go to talk about Anderson Valley because that's where this rosé hails from, and it's an area that I'm super excited about, and I'm planting some flags and planting some vineyards in that land up in Mendocino County. So I'm guessing some of you on this call have been out to wine country in California. You probably go to Napa. You probably maybe been to Sonoma. Well, if you north of Sonoma, the next county up is Mendocino, and you have to make an effort to get there. It's another at least an hour plus drive up Highway 128. But it's like going back in time. It's like what Napa and Sonoma might have been 50 or 75 years ago. It's a lot of vineyards, just a handful of wineries. It's this narrow 15-mile long valley, so relatively small valley, very little valley floor. It's mostly steep hillsides on both sides of the valley, forested on the southwest side, and meadowlands, hillside meadowlands and ridge on the northeast side. And it is open to the Pacific Ocean and the influence of the fog and the wind. So it's a great place to grow Pinot Noir. A little bit more history about the valley, because I think we have time to talk about it. It was, it had a pre-Prohibition period or era where there were Italian immigrants especially putting vineyards in back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And then Prohibition happened. And then the modern era in Anderson Valley really started in the 60s and 70s when pioneering, folks went up there and started planting all kinds of grapes. But eventually they landed on planting a lot of aromatic whites and ultimately Pinot Noir, because they figured out that it was a cool climate. It was a cool place. And that's what Pinot Noir and these aromatic whites really like, and some Chardonnay too. And so the AVA, the appellation, was established in 1983. So it's a relatively young appellation. And there's about 100 vineyards and just about 10 wineries that actually produce wine in the valley. The other thing that's notable about Anderson Valley now is over the course of the past few decades, it's turned into a predominantly Pinot Noir region. And there's, on a percentage basis, there's more Pinot Noir grown in Anderson Valley than any other appellation in California. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I told you it's a small valley. It's not a lot of Pinot Noir. It's just the highest percentage, meaning there's a huge focus on that single variety in Anderson Valley. And I think that's why you're starting to see more and more Anderson Valley Pinot Noir out in the marketplace. It's starting to gain traction and gain critical acclaim and just gain, the love of wine drinkers all over the world. So the grapes that go into my Rosé of Pinot Noir come from Valley Foothills Vineyard, which is located in the center of Anderson Valley. And it's a vineyard that was originally planted back in the 1970s. And the block that we're working with here, the Jackson Clone Pinot Noir that goes into the Rosé, is 20 to 30-year-old vines. So very well established, vineyard. And what we do is we hand pick these grapes at night before the sun comes up, and we truck them into the winery. And one of the things we did this past year, and this was a little bit of an experiment because I've been making this wine for a few years now at Naked, but I wanted a little more color and I wanted a little more structure this year. Winemaking is all about, you figure out a way to do things, but you're constantly experimenting. You're constantly trying to tweak something. You're trying to make it better. You're not throwing out the whole baby in the bathwater, but you're making small tweaks, small experiments. And this year, the tweak that we made was, in the past, we've either immediately pressed the grapes when we get them into the press and got that juice separated from the skins. But then you get a very light color rosé, which there's nothing wrong with that. But you also lose, in addition to the color, you lose a little bit of structure and a little bit of richness of fruit character. And so this time we brought them in and we left them in the press. We loaded them in the press and left them in overnight, and didn't squeeze it, but just let them sit in there. And then we pressed off the next morning. And you can see it really made a difference in the amount of color we were able to extract for this rosé. And I think it also makes a difference in the aromatic profile and the flavor profile of this wine, because it, like for me, nothing's more boring than listening to somebody talk about what they're smelling and tasting. And we're all completely different in our taste experiences and our olfactory, literally the way we're wired, our sensibilities. But I get, when I stick my nose in this wine, I get like an orange peel kind of thing, some raspberry, lavender flowers. I'm sorry, lavender, some floral notes. I get a little bit of like an apple watermelon kind of thing going. You can all play this game along with me. And if you're getting completely different things, that's totally cool too. I think we can smell, I don't even know what it is, but it's something like millions of things. So we're just starting here.
Derek, were you, like, how involved were you in the vineyard sourcing and management of the wine?
How involved in the vineyard decisions on this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a vineyard that my friend Casey Hartlett farms. So Casey deserves the lion's share of the credit on the farming. But I do have a great relationship with Casey, and I've been working with him in this vineyard for 10 years now. So we've done a lot of work in that block. We actually changed the pruning from cordon pruning to cane pruning. That was the request that I had made. I can go through the vineyard and we talk about the canopy management, how many leaves we're going to leave, and where we might de-leaf or pull leaves from the vines. So while I don't own or lease this vineyard, they are purchased grapes. It's a long-standing relationship, and it's something where Casey is a friend of mine, and we do work very well together, collaborate together, and he takes my input for sure.
And is there like a specific block that you harvest from, or just all throughout the vineyard?
This is a single block of Jackson Clone Pinot Noir, right in the middle of Valley Foothills Vineyard. So it is a uniform block of grapes, and we get about 18 or 20 tons of grapes that we bring into the winery.
Well, it's absolutely spectacular.
I'm glad you like it.
Derek, just real quick on that, you mentioned this new tweak you made to production. There are a couple different ways to make rosé. Have you tried any of those? And maybe talk a little bit about the other methods that can be used to produce pink wine?
Absolutely, great question, Trevor. So yeah, the traditional method is to bring the grapes in and do what's called direct press. Put the grapes in the press, turn it on, squeeze them, create pressure, get the juice off the contact with the skins as quickly and as possible. That's where you get the, I'm sure some of you have had the Provençal rosés from France. That's where you get those wine. They just have a very light, they call it onion skin, or a very light hue. They almost look clear, some of them. You don't get a lot of color. You still get a lot of aromatic compounds and flavor compounds. Those still go along for the ride. But they're structured slightly differently than the rosé that you have in your glass here tonight. And they can be a little bit, the other thing with rosé is you can put it through malolactic conversion or not. You can retain all that natural acidity, the malic acid, or you can soften it up by letting it go through a partial or a full malolactic. Full malolactic would be a little rare when it comes to rosé, but you can do it if you're starting with something very high in acid. The other way you can do it, Trevor, to finish answering your question, is you can do what's called saigner, which is a fancy French word which means bleed. So you can leave the skin in contact with the juice for a longer period, and then bleed or drain that juice off of that contact, that skin contact. Or you can do this kind of like modified method that I employed by loading the press and leaving it in contact that way, which would be like a short-term maceration, you might call that.
Great, thanks, Derek. And in that saigner method, then you end up having wine produced as both red and rosé, right? So what you don't bleed out of the tank stays red and it gets more concentrated. I understand that's how that works.
That's exactly right. And you end up maybe with something cool on both sides. One of the reasons you do that from the red wine standpoint is you want to increase the color, increase the structure of the still wine that you're making, the still red wine. So it can be a win-win. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think we probably need to move on to talking about the Grenache, because I don't think anyone has much left. Judging by the chat, it's going down pretty easy in the group. So if you want to talk about it while people are still drinking it, we better hurry up.
Sounds good. Yeah. And I'm happy to talk about this one and share this one with you, because this is the first time I've made Grenache at Unti Vineyard. I've worked with these grapes in past years, and we're gonna, in true Naked Wines fashion, we're gonna, open up the curtain completely here. And I'll tell you this story about how I used to bring in a small amount of Grenache, usually 3, 4, 5 tons the past few years since 2016. And we blended it into the Syrah. And because it was such a small percentage, we didn't make a big deal out of that. We didn't put it on the label. It was just something to round out the character of the Syrah. And as I worked with, that was just an idea we had because we had this big chunk of Syrah, a little chunk of Grenache we had it made available to us by George Unti. And now, as I've worked with these varieties, for a few years, I've realized that I fell in love with the Grenache. And I brought home some samples about a year and a half ago, and me and my wife were tasting them one night, some barrel samples, and she absolutely fell in love with the Grenache. Like, she just would not stop talking about it for like a week or two. And I called up the team at Naked, and I said, hey, is there a chance we could take this Grenache that we're working with and create its own bottling? And in true Naked fashion, they said, heck yeah, let's do it. Sounds great. So this is the result of that conversation, and this is the first time I'm getting to share this wine with everyone. So it's true, Christy. Christy did say that. She's vouching for me. Thank you, Christy. So with that said, again, I jumped ahead a little bit. Let me rewind. Unti Vineyard in Dry Creek Valley. George Unti was an executive in a grocery chain. He was nearing the end of his career. He loved wine. He and his wife, Linda, they loved traveling to Europe, and they loved traveling to France and Italy and everywhere along the Mediterranean Sea. And he wanted to put these Mediterranean varieties, in addition to some, California or Croatian varieties, Zinfandel, things like that, in Dry Creek Valley, where he had recently bought some land. And in 1990, he started planning the property, and he created this amazing 60 acres of just a hodgepodge of wild grape varieties. It's really cool now to make a Fiano or to make something a little, less obvious or more obscure. But George, back in the 90s, was putting Fiano, Aglianico, Grenache, obviously. What else was he doing? Sangiovese, Vermentino. He was putting all these things in that are just not household names, 3 decades ago. And I give him a lot of credit for kind of having a vision and sticking to it. And he also decided early on that he wanted to be organic. He didn't want to use herbicides. He didn't want to use pesticides. He wanted to use composting, to fertilize the soil. He's a very responsible and conscientious man. And I've come to really respect him, and I respect how he farms his vineyard. And I farm my vineyards the same way. And even before I met him, but we kind of synced up over that. And then I met him, and he's just a lovely man, and as is his wife. So we hit it off, and we've been working together swimmingly, these past few years. And I get Grenache, Syrah, and Zinfandel from Unti, and I'm super lucky to do it, because if you go check the Unti website, which I'm sure some of you might do while we're talking or after this call, they sell their wines for a pretty penny, and they're worth it. They're beautiful wines from an amazing vineyard, and I'm really lucky to have this be a part of my Naked Wines portfolio. So specifically about the Grenache, why don't we talk about Grenache a little bit, huh? So Grenache is just the grape itself. Let's talk about that. It's one of the most widely planted grape varieties around the world. Not many people know that. I think it's the 7th largest or most planted grape variety in the world. Anybody know that on this call? Raise your hand if you knew that. I see a couple of no's. Oh, Trevor knew that? Okay, good knowledge, Trevor. I like it. I think it originally hails from Spain. And you might have heard of Garnacha, right? So that's the Spanish term. Like with most grape varieties, they have 10, 20, 30 different names for the same grape variety. You get Garnacha, you get Grenache. It can be called Grenache Tinto. It can be called a lot of different things. But it's also gained renown in other parts of the world. So let's talk about those. France, right? Have you ever had a Chateauneuf de Pape? Anyone on this call? Probably. I can't see all the hands, but I'm sure some of you have had a CDP. that's, you got Grenache in that. Big part of, Chateauneuf. If you've had a GSM, right? What does the G stand for in GSM? Grenache, right? Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre. That's, you see a lot of those out of Australia. So Grenache is really kind of, it starts off in Spain. It's big in France. It's big in Australia, and there's some great plantings here in California as well. So we talk about the wine. One of the things about Grenache, one of the reasons it is typically blended with Syrah or Mourvèdre, it's a light color, light acid, light tannin variety. So, some people might go, well, then you need more color. You need something that's a little more tannic. But for me, those are the things I love about it. I mean, you stick your nose in this wine, you have a taste. It's just this explosion of fruit and spice. And again, I don't know if you want me to rattle off like all the things I smell and taste, but it's just, there's a purity, there's a hint of smoke here. It does see a little bit of aging in oak on this wine, but only like 15-20% new. So it's mostly, this wine is really about the purity of the fruit, the high quality grapes we get at Unti. And even though it's not the darkest wine in the world, I still think there's a complexity and just a deliciousness to this wine that I can totally understand why my wife fell in love with those barrel samples and why I'm so happy with how it turned out when we bottled it up. Someone said I do smell the smoke. Yeah, like a wood smoke, just a hint, right? It's not overwhelming, but it's there. There's also that, orange again, cherry. Those tannins I mentioned, the tannins are super smooth. There's nothing out of place here. I sometimes get like there's spice, there's, cinnamon, just a lot of really fun things going on in this wine. It's really easy drinking. I think it's dangerously easy to sip, and it's because of the body and a bit of the acid that's there. I think it's real, versatile food pairing wine as well.
What would you pair it with, Derek?
Oh, that's a great question. Let's see. Let me pair this one with. I mean, there's a couple routes you could go with this. In a way, from a body standpoint, you're almost talking about like a robust Pinot Noir. So you could do, fish, chicken. You could do, something that has a little bit of mushrooms or earthiness to it. But you could also throw it up against like burgers and barbecue or something like that too. So
I think it would be an awesome barbecue wine because it's not too heavy. So it's like definitely a red you can enjoy heading into warmer weather for sure.
And I think the spice would be a nice bridge element, right? In food pairing, anything that has a hint of spice or a kick of spice, I think would really be nice.
Would you ever consider making a rosé of Grenache?
Well, I need to get some more. Like I said, I only get that like 3 to 5 tons out of Unti, but yeah, it would be fun. Yeah, for sure. I've done a rosé of Cabernet Sauvignon, and that was wild. And then mostly I've done rosés of Pinot Noir. But you can do a rosé out of anything. I have friends that make rosé of Zinfandel, rosé of insert grape variety here. It seems like these days. I see someone saying they're going to do grilled salmon later. Go for it. Yeah, absolutely. Grilled salmon, smoked salmon too. That hint of wood smoke we're getting here. That would work. Yeah. Obviously, we need more Grenache. Cool. I can't help but see some of the chats. We're now up over 100 chat comments, which is awesome. Thanks, guys. So is there anything, Laura, Trevor, that we can answer now? Do you want me to riff some more on Grenache or move on to the Syrah? Looks like we're maybe a little ahead of schedule. Maybe that leaves more time for Q&A at the end, which is my favorite part.
I have one question. If you could go anywhere else, like outside the US to make Grenache, what region, like internationally, would you go and why?
Ooh, that's a great question. To specifically make Grenache, well, I've been to Australia, and I'll talk about a bit about that when we get to the Syrah. And I have family in Australia, so just based on that, I might want to go down that way and maybe make a Grenache or a GSM from down there. I've been to France too. It wouldn't be bad being in the Rhone again, but because of the family that I have in Australia, I might go with that. Might be a great way to spend some time with them.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
I think we're right on schedule. I think we're ready to move on to the Syrah if you are.
Absolutely. I'm sitting down. Hope you all are having a good time. Hope you're keeping those glasses filled. Okay. Remember what I said, the more you drink, the funnier I get. And I'm no comedian, so drink up. All right. So Syrah, this one's going to be a little easy because I've already told you about Unti Vineyard and why it's such a special place. At Unti, there are 10 of those 60 acres that George planted are planted to Syrah. So so it's a pretty big, that's a pretty big chunk of what he's doing, and he's made a big commitment to Syrah, and I'm really glad he has because I think Syrah, grown in Dry Creek is just an amazing thing. As with Grenache, maybe we should talk a bit about the grape first and talk about, Syrah around the world and how it got to California. The Syrah is a blend of Dureza and Mondouse Blanc. So it's a blend of a red grape variety and a white grape variety. And this is not a crazy thing. I mean, think about Cabernet Sauvignon is a blend of a crossing of Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc, right? So a similar kind of thing that happened, back in history. It's not Petite Syrah. Some of you have probably had a Petite Syrah. That's a blend of Syrah and Pellersin. So that's a different thing altogether. But Syrah itself, it's gained the most fame in Hermitage in the Northern Rhone, where it's known for producing really complex, meaty, structured, long-lived red wines. Côte Rôtie, Saint Joseph, it's a pretty important, very, very important, red grape in France. I mentioned, Australia before, and now we're talking Shiraz, which is just an Aussie way of pronouncing Syrah. And I have traveled to the Barossa and McLaren Vale and Eden Valley, and specifically on my last trip to Australia, I went to this amazing vineyard called Hill of Grace, which is the Hinchke vineyard, and it was planted back in the 1860s to Syrah or Shiraz, and that was a pretty mind-blowing experience to see these 150-year-old a vineyard that goes back 150 years and produces a wine that I think the last time I checked sells for about $800 or $900 a bottle. So a little bit dear, but I did visit the winery, get to taste some of that wine. Pretty amazing stuff. So what is the point of the last 2 minutes? What I'm talking about here, Syrah makes some of the most highly prized, highly priced, wines in the world. And I think for me, it's pretty obvious why. I mean, when you just smell a Syrah, you don't have to taste it. Just get your nose in the glass, and you're talking about just mind-blowing complexity. An explosion of flavors, everything from herbs to dark fruit to olives to a briny, almost saline character. Oftentimes pepper, black pepper, white pepper. There's just such complexity to this wine, and then you go, okay, well, I've done my little sniff. Let me get in my mouth, and the whole experience kind of continues. You can get like a mocha chocolate thing going, almost like a iron or sanguine kind of character I love in wines. And this is a serious wine. There's no residual sugar on this wine. It's not sweet. It's a dry wine. And it's probably this one more than the first two wines, the Rosé and the Grenache. It's begging for a little bit of food, if you ask me. Maybe it's just 3:37 Pacific time, and I'm already thinking about dinner. But this is begging for some meat, or maybe a really well prepared, well seasoned course of mushrooms if you're a vegetarian or you're not so much into the meat. But it's just a wine that I don't know. I know my wife. I said my wife's in love with the Grenache. I'm in love with the Syrah. And maybe that's why we make a good pair. But it's a fun wine for me to make. It's one of my favorite wines to drink. I do drink a fair bit of Syrah and Shiraz. Just in my, what do you call it, your personal life, or in my, at our house. It's something that we do tend towards, and I pinch myself that I get to make a Syrah from Unti Vineyard, because I think I couldn't find a better source for grapes.
Yeah, Derek, you read my mind. I was going to ask about that. Clearly, you have a passion, a deep, evolved, fiery passion for Syrah, and you've documented that really well here. So we get that point, and you've had the experience of traveling to some of the best, most sort of heritage vineyards of Syrah on the planet. So what about Unti do you feel makes it a great place to grow Syrah?
I think it's it's three things right off the top of my head. It's the fact that George planted the grapes in the right spot, or not the grapes, the vines. I'm sorry, in the right spot. Meaning, there's an old saying. It's kind of a trite saying about. There's a lot of these in the wine business, but Syrah likes a view, right? And you think about Hermitage. It's on a steep hillside, basically a mountain, and so Syrah likes devigorating soils, shallow soils, high up on the mountaintop. And I get my Syrah from 2 blocks at Unti, and one of them is one of those hillside blocks. I think the second thing that springs to my mind is the clonal selections and the material, the vine material that George selected. He has a nice mix of material, and I think it lends some complexity and character to the grapes that we get out of there. And then the third thing is just the climate of Dry Creek. It's warm, and it can get downright hot in the summertime some days, but it still has relatively cool evenings. And I do subscribe to that philosophy of winemaking where, all things being equal, when you grow a variety on the edge of where it will ripen, you get a more interesting wine. That's when you get those pepper notes, those olive notes, those things like that coming out. If you grow it in too hot of a region, the fruit notes, the jammy fruit notes are going to dominate everything. So the only way we get the complexity, the aromatic complexity, the flavor complexity, is when we grow on a slightly marginal location or site. And Unti, I would argue, for Syrah fits that bill.
We have a really good question from one of our angels. What is a block?
Yeah, so a block is a subsection or a small part of a vineyard, and it's often, you can designate it based on the material, when it was planted, what it was planted to. In Pinot Noir vineyards, you'll often see blocks referred to by the clones, that of Pinot Noir, or the selections, Pommard 667, 777, 115, they're planted to. Or it could just be the lay of the land. You might have a hill block, a floor block, a river block, a house block. All these things that are just geographic things, or ways we designate or make sense of them as human beings rolling through these vineyards. Great question. And a block, I see a block isn't a certain size. No, a block could be a row of grapes, or it could be 1,000 acres of grapes. It could be super small or super big. It just depends on the lay of the land and how it was planted. Awesome question. It's not a uniform unit of measure like an acre or a hectare, something like that.
Cool. We have another good question here from the chat. Jim Hastings was working ahead, and they opened the bottle yesterday of Syrah, and they're commenting on how delicious the aroma and the taste are now. So the question is, how long would you recommend opening this and letting it breathe before you drink it?
That's awesome. So cut out for just a second, Trevor. Did you say you opened the Syrah yesterday?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll play that game with you, or else I decanted mine because I opened it today. So I'm with you on, like, these are young wines, right? I mean, I think the rosé and the Grenache are just boom, take them out and they're good to go. But the Syrah, I think it needs a little air, benefits from air. I would argue if you have the willpower and can even keep a little bit in your bottle over the course of 3, 4, even 5 days, the wine will evolve and it won't go bad. It's not going to go to vinegar anytime soon. So this wine, we often talk about, and we put it in the notes that we make, how long you think this wine will drink. I mean, you can be drinking this wine in 10, 20 years and it'll be good. Another way of saying, it's good over the matter of a few days right now if you want to open it up and enjoy it over a few days. Can't leave a bottle open that long. I agree with you, Mary.
Speaking of, serving advice and aging potential, for all 3 wines, like, what would you recommend as far as like aging, laying down, if angels want to take that route?
Yeah, great question. So serving thoughts on these, the rosé, there's no need to wait. My only advice on the rosé would be don't drink it too cold, don't drink it too warm. I think there's another old saying in the wine business that most people drink their white wines too cold and their red wines too warm. I think there's truth in that. If you drink it too cold, you're gonna mute the nose, mute the flavors. But you also don't want it to be, room temperature. So chill the rosé just down a bit. If you don't have a way to measure the temperature or anything like that, just stick it in the fridge 30 minutes or an hour before you want to enjoy it, and then take it out and enjoy it. No need to hold on to it. Enjoy it early and often. The Grenache, now the Grenache is kind of a tweener. Like, this wine is going to be good for a long time. It's a balanced wine. It's got great structure. It's got nice acidity. This wine could last a while too, but it's just so, like, joyful and delicious and bright right now. I don't see the need to wait on the Grenache. And I think you could enjoy it, over the next few years, 5 years, 10 years, maybe even. This Syrah, it's just a matter of how you like your wines. If you want that, that black fruit, and you want the fruit to be dominant, drink it over the next few years. If you want the secondary notes to develop, the leather, the kind of earthy, mushroomy kind of thing, then wait in the 5 to 10 year window. And if you like aged wines, go 10 plus. There's another thing, I've heard this many times. I didn't invent this, but a lot of people have said this, buy 6 bottles, buy 12 bottles, open one a year. It's a fun thing to do. You get a master class on how wine ages, and you'll get to know that wine in a way that you would never experience if you just enjoyed all the wine in the first year or two, right? So if you're able, if you love the wine that much, maybe there are, a lot of you on this call, maybe a handful of you love the wine that much, maybe, buy enough where you can have a bottle or 2 each year over the next decade. And I guarantee you'll learn a lot about wine and how wine ages by doing so.
All right, so we've been trying to keep up with the questions on the chat, but there are a couple of really good ones we wanted to save to the end to really get your full attention. So I'll start at the top of the list here. You mentioned picking at night a couple times, especially with the rosé, and in our chat earlier, you talked about getting up early or in the middle of the night. Why do you do that? Explain that, the thought process behind that.
Few different reasons for that. One reason is it's easier on the crew, the picking crew, because at harvest time it can still be very warm, and it's a lot easier on the workers that are hand harvesting these grapes, which all of these grapes are hand harvested, I should mention. And so we work at night. The other reason you do it is you retain acidity. If you were to evaluate a cluster of grapes and a specific grape within a cluster over a 24-hour period, the day before we harvest, the chemistry of that grape would change over the course of that 24 hours. You would respirate or lose a little bit of the acidity in the daytime when the temperatures were over 50 degrees, and you would retain or recapture, in a way almost, some of that acidity in the evening hours. So one of the ways to retain freshness is to pick at night. And then the third, and a really important reason, is if you pick by day or pick in the morning and then have the grapes trucked in the day and they're getting hot throughout the day, there are, I don't want to freak anybody out, but there are naturally occurring bacteria and things that will start to, and yeast, right? That will start to work on the skins and the juice, and will start to ferment or cause some spoilage, some very low level spoilage in the grapes or the juice. And that's something that we don't want, and we want to control for that. And one of the ways you do that is by bringing in the grapes cold. So things won't ferment when they're 40 degrees, but they will ferment when they're 60, 70, 80 degrees.
Great. We have another question. And I could probably answer this, but I will let you take it.
Not just any
how many bottles of the rosé do you typically produce?
How many rosés? Okay, so I normally produce 2 rosés. Can you guys hear me? I just got an internet connection warning. Am I good?
You're good. You're great.
Thank you. So I normally produce 2 rosés, and in 2020, this is a little bit of a sad story, but I'll share it anyways. Some of you might have heard we had some pretty serious fires out here last year in Northern and Central California. And unfortunately, so I was able to make the Anderson Valley Rosé, and we didn't have any issues with smoke or smoke taint up in that part of Mendocino. But my Santa Lucia Highlands vineyard that I work with, we did have a fire that was located very close to that vineyard, and the smoke did create a lot of ash that dropped on the grapes and in the vineyard, and that was a loss. So we were not able to harvest those grapes. And the one thing I would tell you, I really want to assure you, when you see a 2020 bottle of wine from Central or Northern California, you do not have to worry about the quality of the wine in the bottle. We spent a lot of time, both from a lab standpoint, analyzing the grapes, and also from doing what's called micro fermentations in small 5-gallon buckets to see if there was any smoke taint or smoke character that was carried into the grapes or the wine. So, and if there was anything at all that we were concerned about, we did not pick the grapes or bring them in. So, and I'm not trying to give myself or Naked Wines all the credit there. That's pretty much a blanket statement about the wine industry. So that's a way. I think the industry as a whole was very responsible last year. And though we did suffer some losses, like I mentioned, in that Santa Lucia Highlands vineyard, most of the vineyards and most of the grapes were not affected, not impacted at all. And we can move forward. Now, fire going forward is a concern, and something that's going to, rear its head again, I'm sure. But thankfully, we were able to harvest most of our grapes in 2020. And that was a long answer to. I could have just said I make 2 rosés, but I made 1 last year.
So Derek, this good question just popped up in the chat. I've been getting this a lot in different venues. How do you see climate change affecting your growing region? So, wow, that's so many perspectives on that. We could literally talk for an hour about that one. Yeah.
2 things spring to mind right off. One is the thing I'm fairly certain about, or I have some confidence just based on our experience the past 10, 20 years. I think it's this thing about the extremes becoming more common and variability becoming more common. I think that's pretty well established at this point. The fire season that I just mentioned, it used to start in late October, early November out here in Northern California. And now we're getting these lightning strikes that weren't very common in late August, early September. So I think we're seeing variability in a way. Again, I don't want to complain, because I think about my friends in France where they're getting hailstorms and they're getting all kinds of horrible things. And in California, we're so fortunate to grow grapes here. But I think we are seeing more variability in weather patterns. The thing that I'm not so sure about is the specifics of place and how that will impact place. Like me and my friend Brad Wiley up in Anderson Valley, we often talk about, everybody thinks about climate change equaling warmer weather. But but run this out a few chess moves. If it gets warmer in Central California, that creates more of that pull from the ocean, and the coastal regions, the areas right within the 5-10 mile strip of the ocean, might actually be cooled down by more of that fog and cool ocean air being pulled inland as warm air rises in the central valleys. So the reality is, I think it's going to be site specific, and but I do think we're going to see more fire pressure and more variable weather. Like the other thing I would add just real quickly is we're in the second year of drought conditions here, and all the ponds up in Anderson Valley and in Sonoma are at like they're half full or less than half full. So water is a big issue that's going to be a bigger issue going forward out here.
I have a good question regarding the Syrah vines at Unti. Do you know how old they are?
Yeah, they were planted in the late 90s, I believe 1998 and 1999. So doing the math really quick there, they're a little over 20 years old. And vines are kind of like people. This is oversimplifying it a little bit, but we all remember what we were like when we were 22, 23, 24 years old. We were pretty vigorous, full of life, but we had a little bit of knowledge, just enough to be dangerous. These vines are in the prime of their life. They're really expressing themselves well, and they're going to do great for another at least 20, 22, 23 years, I think. This is my favorite part. I'm just waiting for the next great question. I love it.
All right, this is probably a good one. We're kind of getting up against the timeline, so this is probably a great one to end on. Bring it full circle. What is, Derek Rohlffs, the best part about being a winemaker for Naked Wines?
Sitting here talking to you all right now at
Yes.
3:54 in the afternoon, drinking, tasting a few wines. I mean, that's not bad, right? The best part, we were talking just before we joined the call. I'm waking up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning to drive up to Wiley Vineyard, which is a vineyard up in Anderson Valley that I lease and farm. And we're going to be training some young vines. And it's just, I love being outside in a vineyard and being a farmer. When I started making wine 20 years ago, my whole goal was to have vineyards and to plant new vineyards and to grow grapes. And that's what I'm doing now. And it's really thanks to Naked Wines allowing me to, giving me the time and the ability to spend my time out in the vineyard and in the winery. So I don't have to worry about selling these wines. We have some amazing, talented, smart people that do that every day. And I can just focus on, what we're putting in the bottle. Yeah, I can pay Christy and Grenache. Yeah, I know I've got your number on that one, Christy. Thank you. And you are one of those people. Thank you. Any other questions? We got a few minutes left, don't we?
Yeah, we've got a few minutes left.
More questions, please.
I think there is a question as far as are there specific varieties that are going to be impacted by climate change?
Sure. All right. Well, let's imagine that scenario where you're not in a very coastal region, like most vineyards are not. You're in more of a Central Valley region where it is going to get warmer and drier. Or let's make that assumption. I think, I've read studies about Napa, for instance. A lot of us have been to Napa. You can imagine this, where along, Carneros is typically known, the southern part along the bay is typically known for cool climate varieties like Chardonnay, Pinot Noir. And the middle part is, and the middle and the north part is Cabernet country. In the future, maybe we're talking more of these, Rhone varieties or Mediterranean varieties being the right varieties. If you're talking about an increase of, 5 or 10 degrees, it could shift the patterns of what people decide to plant and what they farm and what will grow well. Like I said before, my concern is not so much that Cabernet will fail to grow in certain regions anymore. It's just that you won't get that you won't get as balanced of a wine if it's grown in too warm of a climate. You'll get something that's a bit jammier, that's higher alcohol, potentially riper. And for me, that's just not my jam. I like things that are relatively restrained alcohol, a nice food friendly acidity, and something you can drink more than a glass of. That's what I like. I know it to each their own when it comes to wine. And with Zinfandel, just one other side note on Zinfandel. I know that's what we're talking about today, but Zinfandel, the clusters themselves don't ripen uniformly. So it's hard to find a 13 something Zin. It needs to be 14, 15, even 16 sometimes. And that's balance for Zin. So it depends on the variety. Anything I'm saying is kind of oversimplifying, but all things being equal, I think it will influence the style of wines that are produced. And my tip would be, look for wineries and vineyards that are located on the edge or the margins of what will get fruit ripe. That's where you're going to have the most complex, balanced wines grown. Any other questions, Laura, Trevor?
Yeah, we got one from Gisette. And Gisette asked, what varietal would you love to create that you haven't gotten a chance to?
Oh, I love that question. This is a conversation I just had with someone at Naked like a week or two ago. I have like a few ideas in my head. From a variety standpoint, I went to Burgundy and Beaujolais in 2017, and I met some amazing winemakers in both areas, but I was really blown away by the Cru Beaujolais that I tasted while I was there, and I'd love to work with Gamay, and specifically a friend I made while I was there in Morgon. So that's a thought. Not really varieties, but I went to Japan a few years ago too, and they're starting to. They've been making, growing grapes and making wine in Japan for a long time. But on the northern island of Hokkaido, they're doing some Pinot Noir. And I think that would be a mind-blowing experience to make Pinot Noir from the North Island of Japan. And so we have a process here at Naked Wines where we submit these ideas, and it's been on my to-do list for the past 2 weeks to type up some of these wild ideas I have. And thank you for the reminder. I'm going to move it up my list now.
Excellent. So Gamay 2022. That's the takeaway, everybody. More Grenache and Gamay in 2022. That's what
Gamay or bust. You got it.
Gamay or bust. Hey, I live in Oregon, and I can definitely hook you up with some fruit. I don't know how it would be when it got down to you, but all right. Well, we're just right on time. Great job, everybody. So much awesome input in the chat, both in questions and comments and compliments. As the inaugural version of this, we hope to do many more of them. So look out for it. This has been, I think, beyond our wildest expectations. It was so much fun to sit and chat with you, Derek. I think you did an amazing job. Pure gold as a host, and just really clearly a master of your craft. And we're very lucky to be working with you. Anything else we need to talk about, Christy and or Kim? Any housekeeping that you guys want to chime in on? You've been kind of lurking in the background. Anything that these folks need to know before they get busy finishing their wines?
I'm a professional lurker. That's what I do. Nothing. Enjoy your wine. Enjoy your day. They're great wines to toast to.
All right. Well,
thank you, Trevor.
Everyone. Cheers, Derek.
Say thank you. Yeah.
Cheers to the Angels.
And cheers. I hope we can do this again sometime, guys. Thanks for joining us.